Diplomatic deals. The Trump administration is hosting a ceremony regarding peace in the Middle East. We're at the White House. Seeking a solution. Why a bipartisan group of lawmakers may have the answer to the next coronavirus relief package. The Vatican and China. Developments on whether the landmark agreement on the appointment of bishops will be renewed. And back to school. Students in Italy return to the classroom for the first time in months. How the Catholic Church is helping. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. A history-making day at the White House with the signing of the Abraham Accords. The agreement normalizes diplomatic relations between Israel and two Arab nations, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, today here at the White House, a major diplomatic victory for President Donald Trump, whose White House team made it happen. And earlier this afternoon on the South Lawn here at the White House, hundreds gathered to witness the historic signing.
President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and foreign affairs ministers from the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain all gathered at the White House this afternoon, putting pen to paper for diplomacy in the region.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
The Accords, named after the biblical figure Abraham, the father of all three great faiths, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The goal, to advance the region and the world.
Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these three countries, we take a major stride toward a future in which people of all faiths and backgrounds live together in peace and prosperity.
The Accords have not been embraced by the Palestinians, yet even the harshest critics have allowed that the agreements could usher in a major shift in the region should other Arab nations follow suit. For Israel, the hope for better days ahead with its neighbors.
This peace will eventually expand to include other Arab states, and ultimately it can end the Arab-Israeli conflict once and for all.
And with just 7 weeks until Election Day in the U.S., the accord is no doubt a huge diplomatic victory for President Trump. The eyes of the world are watching the president broker a more peaceful future in a region of the world that has long been ruled by anger and division.
These agreements prove that the nations of the region are breaking free from the failed approaches of the past. Today's signing sets history on a new course, and there will be other countries very, very soon that will follow these great leaders.
President Trump also says Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain are friends, and that going forward they'll work together on things like trade, security, and health care, and that the accords will establish embassies and exchange ambassadors. And the president hopes 5 or 6 more countries will sign on in the future. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Owen. Great to see White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. And the U.S. House of Representatives, 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans are proposing details of a new bill in order to provide COVID-19 relief for Americans still hurting from the pandemic. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, members of the Problem Solvers Caucus say it's time to end the politics and get something done now. Although Democratic leadership is already criticizing their $1.5 trillion price tag, saying that it's not enough, caucus members say that give it some time and work on it, that it's something that can be done and get done quickly, and it's a framework for the American people. As House Speaker Nancy Pelosi warns, the House will remain in session until lawmakers deliver another round of COVID-19 relief.
People are hope hungry. They are desperate and hungry for hope that Congress can just do its job.
This group of House lawmakers from both parties are laying out the framework for a plan to do just that. starting with support for elections.
We want to make sure there's $400 million available to the states and localities so that they can purchase protective equipment. They can provide proper communication about how and where to vote safely, and that they have the extra staffing needed to count absentee and mail-in votes.
The proposal's buckets of spending include $145 billion for schools and child care, plus $290 billion for small businesses and nonprofits, including $240 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program. And it expands unemployment.
We're proposing a $450 per week, a hard number for an 8-week period, followed by an up to $600 per week amplified benefit, not to exceed 100% of the recipient's previous wage. We don't want to encourage people to stay home. We want to encourage them to get back to work.
Democrats in the Problem Solvers Caucus say the risk of criticism from party leadership is worth it.
I don't think this bill is perfect. None of us do. But it's also not a skinny bill, and it's not a bloated bill. It is a bold bill to heal this country.
Another thing, the proposal also calls for another round of stimulus checks. That's $1,200 for adults and $500 for dependents, that is. Now, regarding the $1.5 trillion price tag, House Majority Whip Steny Hoyer already says that it's not enough. Tracy?
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you so much, Eric. Catholics in Milwaukee have to go to church this Sunday. That's if they're healthy and not caring for a sick loved one. The Archbishop is reinstating the Sunday obligation. In a blog post, Archbishop Jerome Listecki writes in part, on September 14th, the dispensation from the obligation to attend Sunday Mass and holy days of obligation will expire, and it will be the responsibility of those who are capable and not prohibited by other circumstances to attend Sunday Mass. The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is out of a coma nearly a month after being poisoned. The Kremlin critic posted a photo of himself sitting up in his hospital bed in Germany. He is surrounded by his wife and 2 children and says that he is breathing on his own after doctors removed him from a ventilator yesterday. They confirmed he was poisoned, but Russia continues to deny any involvement. More than 24 pro-democracy activists appear in a Hong Kong court charged with attending this summer's annual candlelight vigil to remember the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
We have been holding candlelight vigil for 30 years, 31 years, and we will continue. No matter even with the national security law now imposed on Hong Kong, we will still continue next year for our candlelight vigil.
The defendants include some of the best-known democracy advocates in Hong Kong, including Catholic businessman Jimmy Lai and activist Joshua Wong. The annual candlelight vigil for the Tiananmen victims is an institution in Hong Kong, but was declared illegal for the first time this year. Meanwhile, there were no new cases of COVID-19 reported in Hong Kong today, and officials will now slowly begin to lift restrictions.
We are not able to go back to the relaxation situation in June. So the relaxation is gradual.
Hong Kong just ended its 2-week mass testing program yesterday. It was aimed at identifying so-called silent carriers who show no symptoms of COVID-19. Carrie Lam, the Catholic leader of Hong Kong, says 1.8 million people were tested and 42 infections were identified. The U.S. State Department is updating its travel advisory for Americans going to China and Hong Kong and says U.S. citizens should reconsider traveling at this time. The advisory issued yesterday is not just for COVID-19. It also cites the risk of arbitrary enforcement of local laws. The Vatican Secretary of State says the provisional deal with China over the appointment of bishops could pay dividends for the church. Speaking to journalists yesterday, Cardinal Pietro Parolin called the first 2 years of the accord, quote, not particularly exciting, but added the agreement may lead to a normalization for Catholics in the communist country. Earlier today, a Chinese government official said the agreement has been successful and adds Beijing is looking forward to remaining in contact with the Holy See. The 2-year agreement expires in October. Joining us now is Courtney Mares, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, who has been following this story. Courtney, so good to see you again. I know the current Vatican-China deal is about to expire. Does Cardinal Parolin expect this deal to be renewed?
Yes, the Vatican Secretary of State told journalists that the Vatican expects to renew its provisional agreement with China for another 2 years. The Cardinal said that he also thinks and hopes that the Chinese government has the same intention to prolong the agreement on the appointment of bishops. Cardinal Parolin added that the goal for the Vatican in renewing this agreement is to help normalize the life of the Catholic Church in China.
Courtney, can you remind us again what the church looks like in China?
The 2018 agreement between the Holy See and the Chinese Communist Party was intended to end a decades-long split among Chinese Catholics between the underground church that was loyal to Rome and the state-controlled Chinese Patriotic Association. So far, we know that 8 previously excommunicated bishops have been accepted into formal communion with Rome. However, at least 50 mainland dioceses remain without bishops, and underground Catholics and clergy have reported harassment and detention since the agreement was signed. Human rights advocates have also raised concerns that religious freedom in China has worsened in the past 2 years.
Courtney, what about Taiwan? Will the deal have any impact on the relationship between China and Taiwan?
There have been concerns ever since the Vatican entered into dialogue with China that the Chinese government would put pressure on the Holy See to break ties with Taiwan in order to establish full diplomatic relations. Currently, the Holy See is the only remaining country in Europe that recognizes Taiwan as a country, while the Church has not had official diplomatic presence in mainland China since it was expelled by the Chinese Communist Party in 1951. Amid these concerns, Taiwan's foreign ministry said today that it has received assurances repeatedly from the Vatican regarding the renewal of the Vatican-China deal, that things will not change.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for your time today and your analysis. We really appreciate it. Courtney Moraz, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, a closer look at the number of abortions in England and Wales in the first half of this year. The number of abortions in England and Wales soared in the first half of 2020 amid the coronavirus pandemic. According to new figures published last week by the UK's Department of Health and Social Care, more than 100,000 abortions took place between the 1st of January and the end of June. That number exceeds the number of abortions for the same time period in 2019 by more than 4,000. Joining me now on Skype to offer her analysis is Abigail Foreman, Director of Public Affairs for Right to Life UK. Abigail, welcome to the show. 2019 had the highest annual number of abortions in England and Wales, and I know that there's concern about the trend we're seeing in the numbers so far this year. Why do you think we're seeing this rise in a number of abortions, and also how is it connected to the COVID-19 pandemic?
It's a great question, and I think the answer is multifaceted. I'll offer the things that come to mind immediately. Namely, I think that the government has not done its due diligence in providing women the needed supports that are available to them for unplanned pregnancies. I think the choice, quote unquote, that is offered to women is all too often pushing them in the direction of an abortion versus pushing them in the direction of the services that are available to them if they wanted to keep the baby. The other thing that we're seeing is, unfortunately, during the COVID pandemic on March 30th, the government has allowed a temporary order to be put in place that means women can have an electronic consultation that is either a phone or a video consultation to get abortion pills sent to them at home. Previously, they needed to go to a clinic to get the first set of abortion pills, which was a vital check on their safety to make sure they had the right blood pressure. Going to the clinic also allowed the clinicians to perform an ultrasound to see the baby's gestation. But without these checks, without this in-person check, we're seeing, unfortunately, a rise in complications as well as this rise in abortions.
Yeah, and Abigail, according to this report, medical abortions accounted for 82% of abortions between January and June of this year. Can we talk about the dangers for women using this at-home method of abortion?
Yes, absolutely. The dangers range from heavy bleeding and ruptured ectopics, all the way through to actually, unfortunately, death. We know from a leaked email, actually, that 2 women have died since this order has been put in place from medical abortions. And unfortunately, it's not clear that the government is doing anything to prevent further deaths. We also know that because of the lack of an ultrasound, women are able to get these pills beyond the legal limit of 10 weeks. So to have a medical abortion at home, a woman needs to be under 10 weeks. But there's no way to verify that without an ultrasound. And so there have been cases reported where women had, one woman we know had an abortion, medical abortion at 28 weeks. The police are actually investigating that as a stillborn death. And another 8 cases are being investigated by an abortion provider for women that have received these pills beyond the legal gestational limit.
It's really hard to hear. The government's decision to allow women to take both abortion pills at home was only supposed to be a temporary measure. Are you concerned that this could become permanent? And if so, what measures would you like to see taken in order to stop it?
That is a great question. We are very much hoping that this remains temporary and have actually been pushing the government in any way we can to cause them to see that this order should be ceased immediately. We believe that the best thing that people can do if people are living in the UK or have family and friends in the UK is to contact their local politicians to tell them of the dangers of medical abortion and ask that when the government does its consultation that they make their politician aware that they do not support it and in fact hope that it ceases with immediate effect. We know actually that the vast majority of the public supports increased safeguards for women. The majority of the public, when polled, actually support the requirement of a woman seeing somebody in person before she has an abortion. And so we know that the public is with us on this. It's just a matter of making sure we get that information out and that people contact their politicians.
Abigail, thank you so much for your time and your analysis today. We really appreciate it. Abigail Foreman, Director of Public Affairs for Right to Life UK. Thank you again.
Thank you.
An abortion doctor in Alabama has had her license suspended. Officials say Dr. Leah Torres gave false answers on her application for a permanent license to practice medicine. The abortion facility calls the situation a misunderstanding. For more on this story, including a closer look at the questions the doctor is believed to have falsely answered, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Up next, students in Italy return to the classroom for the first time in months. The American Journal of Psychiatry has issued a major correction to the findings of a study on transgender surgery and its mental health benefits. When the study's authors reanalyzed the data, they found, quote, the results demonstrated no advantage of surgery in relation to subsequent mood or anxiety disorder related healthcare visits or prescriptions or hospitalizations. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and author of the book When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. Ryan, welcome back to the show. Good to see you. So how did the study's original findings get this so wrong, and what exactly led to the correction?
You know, no one really knows where the original study, the authors went wrong. You could chalk it up just to a good faith mistake. Sometimes scholars make mistakes like this. Other people have speculated that, look, there can be motivated reasoning, that there was a preferred outcome. This is obviously a politically salient topic. There's political correctness that's associated with this topic. And so they might have been looking for a preferred outcome. I don't know. And I don't kind of want to, cast judgment there. The reason that the correction was issued was that 7 different letters to the editors were written to the journal from a whole host of well-credentialed, serious researchers and medical doctors pointing out the problems with the study. And I think we should count this as a good sign that they did issue the correction, because patients need to know the truth about what medical care is in their best interest if they're suffering with gender dysphoria.
Ryan, how do these findings compare with other studies on the quality of life before and after gender reassignment surgery?
Sure. So the largest data set and the longest running study was a study out of Sweden from 2011. And it also showed that there wasn't the benefit to transition care that the media frequently touts. And its most startling finding was that there was a 19 times greater likelihood of death by suicide for patients who had had sex reassignment procedures, and that those suicides didn't take place until 10 years after the surgery. And the reason I mention both of those things is that many studies of sex reassignment procedures don't look at 5, 10, 15, 20 years later. They look at, the next year, maybe the next couple of years. And so it's important to look long term. This particular study didn't look at either attempted suicide or completed suicide. It looked at mood disorders and anxiety disorders. It found no improvement for either hormonal or surgical transition on those issues. And it actually saw that there was an increase in anxiety disorders for people who had the surgical transition.
Ryan, as someone who's studied and written on this issue extensively, what do you think seems to be the best course of action for those patients with gender dysphoria? What do we know?
Sure. So the doctors who I've talked with on this, including the former head of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Hospital, say that the problem here is not with the patient's body. And so the remedy here is not going to lie with transforming the body. The problem here lies with the patient's thoughts and feelings. And so the proper remedy is to help the patient line up their thoughts and their feelings with the reality of their bodies. The proper therapy here is going to lie with counseling, not with hormones and surgery.
Well, Ryan, thanks so much for your time today and for your analysis. We always appreciate it. Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and author of the book, When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, schools in Rome are open this week for the first time since last March, and Catholic churches are helping. Students and teachers are following strict safety guidelines in the effort to find more space. The city of Rome reached an agreement with 13 parishes to host classes on church property. Priests are being asked to keep an eye on the children, and if one looks as if they may be sick, they'll be taken into isolation and their parents will be notified. One principal said that she was grateful to the priests for helping the students return to school safely. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.